I'm not somebody who grew up with any kind of sleep disorder such as sleep paralysis or night terrors. I've always been a very heavy sleeper, which is why what I'm about to tell you shocked me to my core. We all have the occasional nightmare, right? I used to call nightmares free 3D immersive horror movies. To most, that probably sounds freakish, but in a weird way, I sometimes like the thrill of waking up after a nightmare. I was living with my one roommate, Patricia, though I just called her Trish. We had very different schedules with work, so we didn't see each other much except on the weekends. This all happened in July. I remember because it was so hot out that I had the window AC unit on full blast every night, providing a white noise that helped me sleep better. It was the first night that I had the nightmare a few days after my ex and I had broken up, and life wasn't exactly the best. I had a dream that I vaguely remember for the most part, but the part that I vividly recall is being in a room full of my family members, sitting quietly around a dinner table. Standing across from me was what I could best describe as a creature that looked like one of the aliens from the movie, only with horns and claws. It resembled what you'd imagine a sleep paralysis demon to look like, but I was still fully asleep and dreaming. The next thing I knew, the thing was standing next to me, looking down at me with a menacing grin. I started to run away in my dream until I found myself in my room, or rather my brain's version of my room. That was the last thing I remember before waking up. My room was pitch black, the AC fan was on full blast, and my heart was racing from the dream. I sat there thinking, wow, that was a creepy dream. After a moment I looked around the room before laying back down, trying to shake off the feeling of dread. The following night I woke up in the middle of the night to find my bedroom door wide open. I usually leave it shut 99% of the time unless I've been drinking. My immediate thought was that it was Trish checking if I was home. I got up to go shut it, feeling a bit uneasy, but I went back to sleep fairly quickly. The next day I asked Trish via text if she came in my room, but she told me she did not. It was always possible I just took a midnight trip to the bathroom or the kitchen that I didn't remember. It was the following night that I had another nightmare, and that same demon creature from my previous dream appeared again. This time was much more disturbing. Instead of being with my family, I was in a dark, square, empty room with that thing, and it kept getting closer to me. Oddly, I don't remember the thing actually moving its limbs to walk. It just seemed to glide closer and closer until it was right on top of me. It felt like I couldn't even move. The creature took a claw and scratched my thigh. I think I even felt the pain in my dream. The next thing I remember is waking up. I don't mean I woke up right after that. I mean I don't remember what happened after that in the dream. But when I did wake, it was dark in the room again, the AC on full blast. I felt a slight stinging sensation on my upper thigh. I instinctively reached down to touch it, and when I did, I felt something on my skin. I rushed to the bathroom, heart pounding, and looked in the mirror. I screamed out loud when I saw a gash in my thigh, red and angry as if something had really scratched me. Panicking, I rushed to Trish's room and turned on the light, waking her up in a start. "How the hell did you get that?" she exclaimed. I screamed back, "I don't know." In a frantic haze, we went back to my room together and threw off all the sheets and covers, looking for any bugs or spiders or any sharp objects I could have laid on. Yes, I understand how illogical that sounds, but what else were we supposed to think? Trish then looked at me, her eyes wide, and said, "Wait." She put her finger to her lips and turned off the AC unit. For the first time in days, the room went quiet. It all became sickeningly clear in an instant as we both heard a faint sound coming from under my bed. A sound that felt like the presence of another person just existing in the room with us. I'm impressed by both of our abilities to not scream right on the spot as we exchanged terrified glances, first looking at the bed, then back at each other. Instinctively, we both backed away and bolted out of the room, racing towards the front door. We knocked on our neighbor's apartment door until he finally answered. We asked him for help. Someone was in our apartment. He was an older guy, so I don't think we expected him to go fight some stranger in our apartment, but he let us use his phone to call 911. While we were waiting for the police to arrive, we heard a door slam shut outside. It sounded like our front door. Neither of us could look out the window in time to see who it was. When the police got there, we confirmed that the intruder was gone. We had left all the lights on in the apartment when we ran away and exited in a rather sudden fashion, so the intruder definitely knew that we had found out about him. In the days that followed, I couldn't shake the image of my dreams. The reflection I had was unsettling. That demon in my dreams was supposed to be him. Even in the first dream, the open door that night meant he might have been roaming around our apartment at night, possibly eating our food. To think this person had actually scratched my thigh so hard it left a mark was more than disturbing. That experience forever changed my outlook on dreams and nightmares. Now, every time I close my eyes, I can't help but wonder what lurks in the shadows, waiting for the moment I'm at my most vulnerable, drifting into a sleep where reality blurs and nightmares come alive. I've been smoking cigarettes every day for years. Before you judge me, let me just say that I recently started seeing a therapist for my nicotine addiction. Unfortunately, it hasn't helped much. The only thing worse than my nicotine addiction is my sleep schedule. I don't know what it is. I find myself staying up hours past midnight and rarely getting out of bed before noon. While I'm trying to fix these parts of my life, they're extremely relevant to what I'm about to tell you. It all began a few months ago. I was standing on my balcony, as I do most nights, smoking a cigarette. I live in a really secluded neighborhood. It's not like the houses around here are right next to each other. Despite this, I have a neighbor whose fence I can see over if I'm standing on my balcony. I'm not nosy or anything, but this particular night I found myself looking into his yard. I had never met the guy, but I assumed he lived alone since there was only ever a navy blue BMW parked in his driveway. But not this night. No, this night there was a black van I'd never seen before sitting in front of his house. I didn't make much of it, just noting the coincidence to myself. The next night, though, I made a point to pay attention to his yard, and the same black van was parked there again. I didn't assume something sinister was going on. I was more intrigued than anything. The following morning I went up to my balcony and looked into his yard. The van was gone for the remainder of the week. I made a game out of observing the van at night, theorizing its purpose. I said I wasn't nosy, but I sure am obsessive. It's actually the main reason most of my friends drifted out of my life. I wasn't going to do more than observe, though. It wasn't my business or place to poke around further. That is until one night when I saw something that completely changed my perspective on the situation. I was up later than usual. It was maybe 5 in the morning. The van was there, as it had been for the past several nights. I was smoking my last cigarette when my neighbor actually walked outside, something I hadn't seen yet. I watched as he made his way to the van, carrying what appeared to be a long black bag. It almost looked like a set of golf clubs, only much heavier. After opening the van's sliding door, he delicately placed the bag inside. He promptly got into the driver's seat and sped off. I was dumbfounded. I had absolutely no idea what he could have been carrying. I was exhausted though, so I figured I'd think about it more the next morning. When the next day came, I decided to go out to my balcony a little earlier and wait for the van to arrive at his house. I brought my laptop up there so I could get some work done while I waited. It was around 10 p.m. and the van wasn't in the driveway, but around 1 a.m. the van pulled in. I quickly shut my laptop and watched. Nothing happened for a good several minutes. The van just sat there, engine running and all. After about 5 minutes, the driver's door opened and there he was. I watched as he went around to the side of the van, slid the door open, and pulled out the same bag he had put in the night before. He seemed to be struggling this time, visibly trying not to crack under the weight of whatever was in there. After waddling a few slow steps, both he and the bag disappeared into his house. I didn't know what to think. I thought about waiting there until 5 a.m. again, but that would be far too taxing on my brain. Something was definitely wrong though, and I was determined to find out what. The next morning I flipped a coin and ultimately decided to follow his van when he pulled out that night. After a pretty unproductive day, I went up to my balcony around 4 a.m. and waited, cigarette in hand. As soon as I saw movement in his driveway, I rushed downstairs, grabbed my keys, and got in my car. I turned my headlights off and waited for the van to turn onto the main road. Once it did, I began tailing it. After 20 minutes of driving, he pulled onto a dirt path that looked like it led into the woods. It did. I followed, and the woods actually started thinning a bit. It seemed like this path had once been a main road or something. We drove for another few minutes before I realized what his destination was. There was a deserted gas station, literally tucked away in some clearing in the woods. Right in front of it was the BMW I'd always seen parked in his driveway. Fear crept in as I realized I was getting too close, so I turned my car around and parked across the street from the dirt road. I must have waited there an hour. His BMW finally pulled out of the clearing, and nervously I started driving back up the path, unsure of what I'd find. I pulled over on the side of the road and started walking toward the gas station. It was eerie. The front door was locked. I walked around to the side. That was locked as well. So was the back door. I needed to know what was inside. There was a row of windows that I tried to open, but none of them would budge. Against my better judgment, I picked up a rock and slammed it into one of the windows. It shattered pretty easily, but there must have been a security system in that place because alarm bells started blaring. I sprinted back to my car, the adrenaline pumping through my veins, the whole time wondering why an abandoned gas station would be rigged with an alarm system. As I sped out of there, I called 911 and gave them a vague description before hanging up. I got back to my house and ran inside, my heart still racing. The next morning I woke up hoping the whole thing had blown over. Boy, was I wrong. I went up to my balcony to see 8 police cars in my neighbor's driveway, lights flashing and everything. I watched as an officer escorted my neighbor out of his house in handcuffs. One by one, the police cars drove away, and I was left with my imagination running wild. I lit a cigarette and stood there, finally alone with my thoughts. I've asked the police for details on several occasions, but they would never answer my questions. I've even tried driving back up to that gas station, but the whole road had been blocked off. Maybe one day I'll work up the courage to walk through the woods and go looking for answers. But for now, the questions hang heavy in the air, unanswered, like smoke curling from my cigarette into the night. This happened when I was a little kid living in our old house in Suffolk County, Long Island. I'm going to say I was about 6 or 7 years old at the time. My older brother and I shared a bedroom on the top floor, which used to be a separate apartment that my dad rented out to an old lady. After she moved out, the upstairs was mainly for my brother and me. The layout of the place was pretty straightforward. At the top of the stairs on the left was our bedroom, which used to be the old woman's living room. Straight ahead was the bathroom, and to the right was an extra kitchen and a small bedroom. We had a million toys in our room. It was huge, with 2 parallel crawling closets on opposite sides filled to the brim with action figures, board games, and all sorts of childhood treasures. There was one toy, though, that stands out in my memory. A bright red race car with a bunch of buttons on it. Pressing those buttons made the car's lights flash on and off, and activated a series of sound effects: honking, revving, driving sounds, and even a little rock song. It was a toy we had for ages. Originally a gift from my brother when he was younger, it had become an inseparable part of our childhood. It was just a random night when my brother and I were both in bed, still awake, when suddenly, like a jump scare from a scary movie, the loud, revving sound of that car toy erupted in the middle of the room. The lights on the car flashed violently, illuminating our faces in a frantic glow. I turned to my brother Luke, my heart racing, and instantly got scared. "Did you do that?" I accused him, my voice trembling. He was laughing hysterically, insisting he didn't touch it. I was terrified, a little kid caught in a whirlwind of confusion and fear. Just as quickly as it started, the toy went quiet. The silence that followed was unsettling, and my heart pounded in my chest. I remember feeling a chill run down my spine, but nevertheless, time marched on, and exhaustion finally claimed me as I fell asleep. It wasn't long until something else happened. One night, when Luke and I were once again in bed, we heard a strange thud echo in the room. Luke, ever the jokester, insisted on trying to creep me out, claiming there was a ghost lurking in the shadows. "Shut up!" I shouted, terrified that if I let him keep talking, I'd never get to sleep. But he just kept laughing, trying to scare me further until we both noticed the light in the corner of the room, the toy car, once again, flickering to life. I bolted out of bed and ran straight down the stairs, crying for my mom. When I reached my parents' room, I burst in, shouting that something was wrong. I must have given a frantic spiel about how the toy car was possessed, and I was sure there was a ghost in our room. Luke followed behind me, still chuckling, but my mom, trying to regain control of the situation, told him to knock it off if he was trying to scare me. He responded, bewildered. How could I turn the lights on from my bed? That night I slept in my parents' room because I was too scared to be alone upstairs. But one night, Luke wasn't in the room. My guess was he was having a sleepover with one of his many friends. I was sleeping in our room by myself, long since having tucked that car away in the small bedroom across the hall because it freaked me out. After my mom kissed me goodnight, I asked her to keep the door open, needing that tiny bit of reassurance in the dark. I rolled onto my side, willing myself to drift off, but being alone made it hard to get tired. I felt wide awake, the shadows pressing in around me. Then from down the hall, I heard a sound I can't explain, a soft, rolling noise, like something moving on its own. My heart skipped a beat and I flipped over to face the door. And there it was. The toy car rolled into the room, lights blazing as it illuminated the walls with an eerie glow. I let out a scream that came straight from the bottom of my stomach, pure terror erupting as I pressed my back against the wall, my heart pounding in my ears. "Mom!" I cried, desperation spilling over. Moments later, my parents rushed upstairs, their footsteps pounding against the wooden stairs. When they entered the room, they noticed the car sitting innocently on the floor, its lights still blinking. I screamed, "Someone pushed the car into the room." My dad exchanged a look with my mom, a mixture of confusion and concern etched on his face. He went to check the other rooms, calling out to see if anyone else was there, but found nothing. There weren't any places to hide up there besides the closets and under the beds, and my dad checked all of them thoroughly. I don't know what my parents thought in that moment. On one hand, they probably chalked it up to a malfunctioning toy or my wild imagination. But on the other hand, I could sense they were slightly freaked out. That toy car didn't have a feature to move on its own. To ease my fears, my dad smashed the toy and threw it in the neighbor's trash. I remember watching him do that, feeling a mix of relief and lingering dread. I slept in their room for a while, cocooned in the safety of my parents' presence, but eventually my dad forced me back upstairs. That experience marked me. It instilled a belief in the paranormal that I still carry with me. The thought that something could linger after death, something that defies explanation, forever changed my outlook on life. That childhood terror transformed into an abiding curiosity about the unknown, and even today, the shadows of that old house haunt me, whispering secrets I can never fully understand. I have a dog that I take for walks 3 times a day. First in the morning, then in the afternoon, and finally at night. We always follow the same route, which takes us through our driveway exit that leads to the cul-de-sac parking lot of the condominium complex we live in. This detail will make sense soon, as it's crucial to what happened one fateful night. On our evening walks, I usually go out somewhat late. I'm not sure why, it's just been a habit ever since I got my dog, and until recently, it had never posed a problem. But one night as we embarked on our final walk of the day, something felt off. Armed with a flashlight, since there are no lights in the parking lot, I had one AirPod in my ear, listening to music while remaining alert to any unusual sounds. As we approached the parking lot, I heard something. An indistinct voice coming from ahead of me. I was so zoned out in my world of music that it took a moment for my brain to register the sound. When it finally did, I paused, pulled out my AirPod, and stood still, straining to listen. Then it happened again, a voice calling out, but I still couldn't see anyone. I made the questionable decision to keep walking forward, hoping it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. But deep down I sensed something was wrong. I stopped again, this time right next to where all the cars were parked. My flashlight cut through the darkness, illuminating the area in front of me as I listened intently. Then I heard it, a muffled voice sounding disturbingly like a child's. It was chilling, the word help resonating in the night air. My heart dropped and panic surged through me, freezing my legs in place. I frantically pointed my flashlight around, scanning the shadows for the source of the voice. I was sure it came from behind the parked cars, yet there was no child in sight, just my dog, who seemed completely unfazed as he sniffed around some nearby bushes. Then it happened again. Help! The word echoed in the darkness, this time 3 more times, each utterance coming from my left side where the cars were parked. A fresh wave of panic washed over me. I was gripped by fear, and I knew I wasn't imagining this. I could see my dog's ears perk up, mirroring my focus as he looked in the same direction. That's when the eerie realization hit me. There was something profoundly unsettling about the way the voice sounded. It didn't entirely resemble a child's voice, rather it felt like a haunting blend of adult and child. Each time it called for help, there was an unnerving lack of urgency. The tone was flat, devoid of emotion, almost robotic in its monotony. My dog and I bolted home, our hearts racing. I tried to explain to my mom what had just happened, but she was puzzled, unsure what to make of it. I suggested we call the police, just in case someone was genuinely in need, but she dismissed the idea, thinking it was unnecessary. Questions flooded my mind. Why was the voice muffled? Was someone trapped inside a car, hidden from view? Or was there something darker lurking in the shadows, waiting for me to come closer? I didn't want to dwell on the possibilities, but whatever it was left me feeling deeply disturbed. The place where I had stopped to listen was etched in my memory, the exact spot where I heard that voice calling for help. In my mind's eye, I can still picture it, the dimly lit area by the parking lot, facing the cars that loomed like silent giants in the darkness. Some might assume the noise originated from the condo complex on the right side, but I knew better. The sound was distinctly coming from the direction of the cars. From my vantage point, there was nothing that suggested the noise could have come from anywhere else. At that moment, I remember the larger trucks and SUVs parked there, their bulk creating shadows that concealed whatever, or whoever, was hiding beneath them. I never figured out the source of that voice, nor did I ever walk those late-night paths again. The chilling uncertainty of what lay hidden in the dark haunted me, and even now, as I recall that night, a shiver runs down my spine. What was really waiting in the shadows? My name is Leo. To be completely honest with you, I'm a little lost in life right now. I won't get into it too much, but all you need to know is that my family situation is horrible. For the past 3 years, I've tried to stay as far away from home as possible. My close friends from high school have been changing in ways I don't like, and I feel like my hometown has nothing to offer me anymore. I'm about to be a senior in college, and to be completely honest, I have absolutely no idea what I'm going to do with my life after that. Enough with the sob story, though. Last year, I found myself in Berlin, of all places. I don't know why I went there, probably searching for a sense of place or trying to find a direction in life. I remember the name of the bar I was in, Ruya. I was there alone, which was nothing I wasn't used to. I had just finished my last drink and was getting ready to leave when I felt around my pocket and realized my apartment keys were missing. Just my luck. I stumbled out of the bar and began walking toward my apartment anyway. The whole place was locked up tight and it was way too late at night to get a replacement set. Not sure what most people would do in a situation like this, but my first thought was to start looking for a place to sleep. As if my luck wasn't bad enough, it started raining. Eventually, I decided to sleep under a nearby bridge. I didn't even know where I was, but I was out of the rain and safe, so I was happy enough for the moment. As I was drifting off, though, I began picking up on some faint voices coming from across the river. Curious, I sat back up and squinted into the darkness. That's when I saw them. 5 men standing on the opposite bank, clustered around a small boat that was tied off. They didn't seem to notice me. It took less than a minute for the sickening realization to hit me. I was witnessing a drug deal, and it was happening right in front of my eyes. My German isn't great, but I could tell they were exchanging briefcases and duffel bags. Adrenaline shot through my veins. I thought about finding a new spot, but I didn't want to draw attention to myself by moving. I figured I'd just wait for this to be over, then slip away unnoticed. But then, all hell broke loose. One of the men suddenly yelled something aggressively in German and pointed a gun at one of the others. For a brief moment, time seemed to freeze. The air thickened with tension as the man at gunpoint raised his hands, desperately trying to appease his aggressor. It looked like a setup, the way they stripped him of his clothing and started confiscating his belongings. My heart raced, and every instinct told me to run. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach as I crouched low, terrified of being seen. Just as I began to inch backward, one of the men shouted something that sent icy fear coursing through my veins. "There's someone there!" Panic surged within me. I bolted without a second thought, not daring to look back. I heard them shouting, but the only words that registered were, "Don't shoot." I ran as if my life depended on it, because it did. I sprinted through the rain-soaked streets, my heart pounding in my chest, lungs burning from the exertion. I didn't stop until I felt I was far enough away, until I couldn't hear their voices anymore. I collapsed against a lamppost, gasping for breath, the adrenaline still coursing through my veins. I felt sick and almost threw up from the drunken exhaustion. What could have happened if they had caught me? They could have easily killed me that night, and sometimes in the quiet moments, I still think about how close I came to losing my life. That experience in Berlin left a mark on me. Sometimes I feel like I'm fated to run forever, chasing something, peace, safety, or perhaps just the hope of finding my way in a world that feels utterly lost. What I'm about to tell you is the reason my parents moved out of a house that had been in the family for 3 generations. I've struggled with depression for most of my life. It's a heavy weight that lingers, making it hard to shake the feeling of being useless. Thankfully, I'm doing much better now, but when I was a kid, things were particularly bleak. I spent a lot of time alone in my room, a refuge nestled in a very woodsy area, surrounded by trees on 3 sides, with a forest separating us from any neighbors. My room was quite spacious for a bedroom, located in the back corner of the house. The windows on 2 walls faced the dense woods beyond, casting an ominous shadow that felt especially daunting for a child my age. The dark woods outside were a constant reminder of my fears, and it didn't help that I was terrified of the dark. Things started happening when I was around 10, in 5th grade, the age where it was no longer socially acceptable to crawl into my parents' bed after a nightmare. But that didn't stop me from having vivid, terrifying dreams. One night, I fell asleep with my favorite nightlight glowing red, its warm hue bringing me comfort. But I woke up unexpectedly in the middle of the night, something that rarely happened to me. Disoriented, I barely had time to register that my nightlight was now a different color. I shrugged it off and fell back asleep, not thinking much of it at the time. Then, a week later, I woke up again, only to find my nightlight had switched to a different color once more. Confused, I asked my parents if they had messed with it. They exchanged glances and told me they had no idea what I was talking about. I explained my concern, and they simply brushed it off, saying it was just a glitch. I accepted that answer, at least for a while. But soon after, I woke up one morning to find my nightlight completely unplugged, just sitting on the floor, silent and ominous. When I mentioned it to my parents, they waved me off, telling me to focus on school instead. My dad even insisted I was too old for a nightlight. A few days later, my nightlight was missing altogether. It had seemingly vanished into thin air. Now, I knew my parents were lying to me. They probably thought I should have outgrown it by then and decided to take matters into their own hands. This incident led to a massive argument between us, both sides adamant that the other was hiding it. I couldn't believe my parents would lie to me about something so important. After that fight, life returned to a fragile normalcy for a week. But then, something even more disturbing began to occur. 3 nights in a row, I woke up suddenly, jolted from sleep without any idea of what was waking me. By the 4th night, desperation gripped me. I told my parents again, pleading for them to believe me. My dad merely brushed it off, saying I was just going through puberty and that it was all part of growing up. The next time I woke, I decided to stay awake, refusing to fall back asleep. That's when I heard it. Faint rustling noises emanating from my closet. Panic surged within me, but my parents didn't believe me. My dad even checked the closet himself, only to find nothing but old toys and posters. Those next 4 days became some of the most traumatizing nights of my life. Each time I woke up to the sound of rustling, feeling more tortured and exhausted than before. I begged my parents to take me seriously, but my dad grew increasingly frustrated. In a moment of anger, he dragged me to the closet, determined to prove there was nothing inside. He began tossing toys around, tearing through the clutter in a fit of rage. Then, it happened. As he pulled down one of my posters, he and my mother froze in horror. Behind it lay a massive hole in the wall, one I had never seen before. My mom screamed, her voice cutting through the silence, and my dad pulled out a flashlight to investigate. The hole was deep. It led into darkness that no light could penetrate. My dad hurried outside, inspecting the area around the house, and discovered a tiny hole in the dirt at the base of the wall. Digging further revealed something horrifying, a passageway that led directly from the woods into my room. Panic engulfed us. My mom and I fled that night to my aunt's house, and soon after, we moved out entirely. I stayed at my aunt's until my parents could find a new place. Even now, the thought of that experience chills me to the bone, and I try to avoid thinking about it. My parents refuse to talk about what happened, and I suspect it's because they feel some blame for not taking me seriously. The chilling reality is that there was a stranger in my room every night for over a month, and I have no idea what they wanted. I'll probably never know. If your kids come to you with something that sounds abnormal, believe them. They might be hiding something far more terrifying than you can imagine. When I was 21 years old, I often found myself home alone at my parents' house. They lived on a sprawling pond that lay directly in our backyard with a small town park just beyond it. Our neighbors were spaced out, each home sitting on generous plots of land, making our block feel upscale compared to the rest of the town. I'm fully moved out now, but this was back when I was still in college. My parents were well off, and we had multiple homes, which meant I spent a lot of time by myself. It was a random summer night, and since I was off from school, I can't recall if it was a weekend or a weekday. But odds are it was a weekday, just another quiet night. I was nestled in the sunroom, my favorite place in the house during the summer, watching my favorite show. It was cozy there, with the windows thrown open to let in the warm breeze. Suddenly I heard splashing coming from the pond. At first I dismissed it, probably just a duck or a goose fighting in the water. But as the splashing persisted, I turned the volume down on the TV to listen more closely. I leaned in against the window, straining to hear. This time the splashes sounded too heavy to be from any waterfowl. It was more like a person thrashing about in the water. I opened the door to the sunroom and stepped outside onto the deck, peering into the darkness of the backyard. That's when I heard it, a low, eerie humming that accompanied the splashes. Someone was definitely swimming in the pond, and they were trespassing. Each house on the pond owned a specific section of water, and this person had no right to be there. I darted back inside to flick on the backyard lights, but as I did, the splashes and humming abruptly ceased. Whoever it was clearly saw me. My heart raced as I stood frozen, contemplating whether it could be a neighbor, even though it seemed bizarre for anyone to be swimming in the pond at night. I decided not to confront them. Instead, I turned off the lights, locked the door, and texted my brother, who was away at college. As I waited for his response, I tried to shake off my anxiety and focus on the TV, but the dark outside loomed large, and my mind raced with thoughts of what I had just witnessed. It was hard to concentrate, and I couldn't ignore the gnawing feeling that something was very wrong. Then I thought I heard a noise on the deck. My heart jumped. I quickly found the remote and switched off the TV, plunging the room into silence. It took a moment for my eyes to adjust, but soon enough, I could hear it. Heavy breathing right outside one of the many windows in the room. Panic surged through me, and I instinctively dropped flat onto the couch, trying to hide myself. After a brief, suffocating silence, a deep voice broke through the night. "I see you." My heart sank. In that terrifying moment, I didn't know whether to speak or remain silent. Clinging to a thread of hope, I blurted out, "Paul, is that you?" Paul was one of our neighbors, and I desperately wanted it to be him just messing with me. But the man outside didn't reply. I only heard his bare feet padding away into the darkness. I lay frozen on the couch, my mind racing. After what felt like an eternity, the thought struck me. I needed to check that all the doors were locked. I bolted off the couch and rushed to the front door. Locked. The side entrance was secure too. My hands trembled as I texted my entire family, explaining what had just happened. My dad responded quickly, urging me to turn on the backyard lights and check if anyone was still out there. "Be the man of the house," he said, trying to instill some courage in me. So I did as he said and cautiously approached the window to look out at the back deck. It was clear, but as I stepped outside with a large knife clutched tightly in my hand, I noticed something chilling. Wet footprints had half-dried on the wooden deck. They were barefoot. I followed the trail of footprints around to the side of the deck, my heart pounding louder with each step, and then I froze. There, peering just over the edge of the deck, were the top of a man's head, his eyes and forehead watching me intently. As our eyes met, a shiver ran down my spine, and he turned away, disappearing into the darkness. I didn't waste any time. I called 911 before even informing my parents. I locked myself inside, my heart racing as I waited for the police to arrive. When they finally came, they asked if we had any enemies or troublesome neighbors. After a quick sweep of the property, they left, but my sense of security had already shattered. That night I shut every window tight and ran the air conditioning for added safety. When I awoke to sunlight the next morning, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. I don't believe that man ever returned to our house, but even now I still think about who he was and what he wanted that night. We may never know, but I was just thankful to have escaped whatever his intentions might have been.